Good morning, welcome to the programme. The headlines this morning: it's back to school after all for the teachers who've not been vetted.
The rules have been relaxed to end the chaos in the classroom.
President Bush is to ask the UN to issue an ultimatum to Iraq.
Scanning the body in 3D, new technology which will help treat cancer patients.
In a few moments, the Education Secretary Estelle Morris will be joining us to explain that U-turn on teacher checks.
And I'm in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, where a year ago, Flight 93 crashed into this field just behind me. This morning, we're going to try and find out how ordinary Americans have been affected by September the 11th, 1 year on.
First, though, here's Kate Saunderson with this morning's main news. Good morning, Kate.
Good morning, thank you. Schools in England and Wales will be trying to contact staff today to tell them to come into work, even though security checks on their background aren't complete. More than 7,000 checks still have to be carried out by the Criminal Records Bureau. But last night, the Education Secretary Estelle Morris changed her mind about the enforcement of the vetting policy because of the disruption it's causing.
Better late than never. Sisters Poppy and Emma can now start school. Both had been forced to stay at home because checks on staff at their West London school weren't complete. Now the government's reversed its policy so their teachers can work before being fully vetted.
Yeah, I was a bit let down that, I couldn't see my friends again. I wanted to find out what they'd done on the holidays and what they'd had fun and where they'd been.
At first it's sort of really exciting that you're off, and then the novelty sort of wears off and you don't have many things to do, so you just sort of sit around.
Some classrooms have been empty for days. The government insisting unchecked staff shouldn't work with children. But disruption became crisis, affecting thousands of pupils. When the Criminal Records Bureau admitted it couldn't clear the backlog, the Education Secretary decided to abandon her policy so teachers could start while the checks are being processed.
What we have to do now is use this as an opportunity to get the system right, because in the end it's going to be a better system, but it's got to be set up properly and it's got to be staffed properly, and you've got to actually trust the people who are doing it, are going to give you the full facts.
Some pupils affected may go back today, but it'll take a while to contact all parents. By Friday, schools hope it'll at last be business as usual after a difficult start to term. James Westhead, BBC News.
President Bush is considering seeking a UN Security Council resolution that would set a deadline for weapons inspections to begin again in Iraq. If the deadline weren't met, the resolution would imply that military action would be acceptable.
Having made the case to politicians at home, George Bush, it seems, is now turning his attention to the rest of the world. Privately, his administration officials admit they're considering asking for a UN Security Council resolution. The aim would be to set a deadline for the return of weapons inspectors. The resolution could then pave the way for military action if the deadline wasn't met. The latest comments from the Iraqi regime remain defiant.
We don't have weapons of mass destruction, and the position of President Bush is arrogant and imperialistic in nature.
The Prime Minister denies his meeting with George Bush this weekend amounts to a council of war. But Tamdi El, the longest-serving member of the House of Commons, wants Parliament recalled tomorrow. Many of his Labour colleagues agree.
You have your discussions before decisions are imminent, not while they're imminent or after a decision has been made at Camp David.
If the UN resolution is sought, the approach will be welcomed by the International Development Secretary. Last night, Claire Short warned America of the enormous dangers of acting alone and urged the Prime Minister to use his counsel wisely. John Sudworth, BBC News.
And the Conservative Party leader Ian Duncan-Smith will be here with his views on Iraq after 7:30 this morning. Hunting does not keep fox numbers down, according to new research by the RSPCA. The 12-month study carried out during the foot-and-mouth crisis, when fox hunting was banned in the countryside, reveals that the UK fox population stayed constant. The pro-hunting lobby has dismissed the findings. Inner-city schools must improve pupil discipline if standards are going to rise. That's according to a policy document being launched this morning by the Conservatives. Among the proposals is a good behaviour contract that parents would have to sign before their children were allowed to join a school. Head teachers would also be given greater powers to expel disruptive pupils, with the abolition of appeal panels. Children starting secondary school are 3 times more likely to be killed or injured on their way to school than primary pupils. The AA says older students usually have to walk further and cross unfamiliar roads on their journey to a new school. They recommend that children be accompanied, even if they are reluctant, at least for the first few weeks of term, until they're familiar with new routes. It's not just cigarettes and alcohol that are cheaper across the channel, according to a new report. Savings can also be made on a whole range of other goods. Researchers from Which magazine found big bargains on electrical goods such as TVs, as well as designer glasses, bicycles and household products.
It's widely known that alcohol's cheaper in France and Belgium. That's mainly because duty tax is lower than in the UK. But the shopping trawl by Which researchers found other savings too. They bought a shaver that was £54 cheaper, and a coffee maker cost the same amount less too. They made big savings on a digital camera, on designer specs and an adult's bike. In fact, on 5 items, they saved £339.
Rip off Britain may no longer be a fashionable slogan for UK politicians, but if you're shopping across the channel, even taking the exchange rate into account, then it seems it still holds true.
The findings may come as a surprise to consumers in countries such as Greece, where this week shoppers protested about the introduction of the euro, saying it meant that prices there have been rounded up. No one, it seems, is happy with their lot. Nicola Carslaw, BBC News.
New computer technology has been developed for surgeons. It's expected to improve safety and accuracy during operations. The equipment, which has been successfully used in a Manchester hospital, allows surgeons to see body scans in 3D and will be particularly useful in the treatment of cancer. More on that live from Manchester Royal Infirmary at 7:15. Now, the first Ealing comedy for 50 years premiered in London last night. Leicester Square was teeming with people hoping to catch a glimpse of the stars of The Importance of Being Earnest. Dame Judi Dench, who plays Lady Bracknell, was there. Rupert Everett made it along as well. But anyone hoping to see Colin Firth in the flesh was disappointed, as he was filming in France. Those are this morning's top stories. The next summary is at 7:30. More now from Sophie and Jeremy.
Kate, thank you very much. 7 minutes past 7. Coming up in the programme as the anniversary of September the 11th approaches, we're remembering Flight 93. That was the plane that came down in a field in Pennsylvania.
Rick Stein is going to be here to tell us why he has travelled the length of Britain looking for culinary delights.
And the green-fingered Alan Titchmarsh will be dropping in to tell us all about his new book.
And plenty of emails and text messages from all of you this morning, because today, a bit of a sad day. Mr. Bowen is leaving me off the sofa, finally, after 2 years. Apparently, if you log on to our website, I haven't done this yet, bbc.co.uk/breakfast, there are tributes, the highlights and the lowlights. What would the lowlights be?
Lowlights and the lowlights.
Yeah, and
I get put into my hair every week, I thought.
Yeah. I think it was you dancing on Children in Need. And
was that a highlight or a lowlight?
That was definitely a highlight, very definitely. And I think there is even a quiz about you, Jeremy.
Better look at it, see if I can answer it.
I'll see if I can answer it as well. Yeah, we'll find out.
Yeah, you better have to.
I'll have a look. Anyway, we shall be talking about that a lot more later on in the programme. But first of all, at 7:08, teachers awaiting checks by the Criminal Records Bureau will be allowed to start work after all. The government made a U-turn yesterday on its new system of vetting after weeks of delay and uncertainty for schools. The episode has marred the beginning of the new school year for thousands of pupils and teachers alike. It can hardly be described as Estelle Morris's finest hour. The Education Secretary joins us now. A bit of a mess, all this, isn't it?
It wasn't the start to term that I would have wanted, and I know teachers, students and parents wouldn't have wanted it either.
Who's to blame?
I'm more concerned about sorting it out now, but let me just say what's been done and what's happened. We've gone back to the checking system that was operating at the end of the summer term, because checks are important, and I wouldn't want parents to think that no checks are being made. So that's where we are, and we'd been led to believe last week that the checks could be put in place by this week, in fact by yesterday. And on that basis, we wanted the enhanced checking system to go ahead. But when I found out yesterday that that only wasn't possible yesterday, but wasn't even likely next week, I thought the best decision was to cut it there, get the children back, get the teachers in, and, as I say, revert back to the old checking system.
So did the CRB, the Criminal Record Bureau, last week guarantee that it would be in place, that they would have done it by this week?
They said that it would be done by September the 4th. I have to say there's a history of it not having worked very well. So when people say we've known for months that it wasn't going very well, there's an element of truth in that it's not settled down well. It's been behind schedule right since spring, and we've been keeping a week by week check on it. But I suppose you want the best of all worlds. I wanted the enhanced system. It was meant to be in place by this September, and there's nobody telling me the enhanced system isn't a good thing to have. And so when last week we were in the position of being told that it could be put in place by September the 4th, we went along with it, but that's not to be, and I do regret a messy start to term. I know as a former teacher that what you want is a crisp start, and that's why I took the decision yesterday. Yesterday was the first day, really, that children were back at school. It's when most local authorities went back.
Estelle, presumably you introduced this new system because you thought there were some real dangers out there that you needed to pick up on, and presumably because that enhanced system isn't there, those real dangers remain. Parents must be worried about that.
That's the balance all the time. I mean, that's the risk that you take. You, on the one hand, want to have more checks because parents are worried, and yet you're faced with schools not going back. This is a
What was wrong with the old checks?
Well, let me give you an example. There were separate checks. So there's what's known as a List 99, which is people...
That's people who've really done bad things.
Yeah, sometimes not broken the law, but are unfit to working with children. And that's run by our department, and we're in control of that list, and I'm still going to make those checks before people go into school. But the enhanced check is checking with the police authorities, but checking local police intelligence and double-checking that people have given the right identity when they're actually applying for a job with children.
How many people have those checks picked up so far?
At the moment, on the List 99, that's the check that's operated by my department, I think, as a bit of a guesstimate, we put about 60 a year on that list. But this is a coordinated system where it's meant to be.
That was under the old system,
That was under the old system. But you could be somebody that we wouldn't want in our schools that isn't on List 99. It gets a bit complicated, but the only people on List 99 are people who have already been teachers or worked in schools.
So what about the CRB then? How many have they picked up?
The CRB is up and operating, and clearly it's picked up some in the cases that it's done so far. But I don't know that. I must admit I've spent most of my time since returning from holiday on making sure that schools were getting the information they needed. But just to be clear on that, the checks are needed, you know. It's sad, but they are needed, and that's why this whole issue is trying to get the balance right.
So what is going to happen now then? The teachers can go back to school, can teach children even if they haven't been checked, but
they've got to be checked against the List 99.
But the other checks that you want carried out
will come through hopefully over the next few weeks.
But do the teachers have to be supervised? Are they going to be watched?
No, what I'm saying to heads is I'm going to leave it to their judgment. They know the teachers that are not checked. I'll say to them, you know, use your own judgment. Leave it to your discretion.
Why couldn't you have said that weeks ago?
You could have done that, but we wanted the enhanced system. Quite honestly, I want the heads being concentrated. I want heads with a full complement of checked teachers. I don't want them having to be making those decisions about exercising the discretion and saying, should they be able to take an overnight trip with students away from school? I'd sooner take that burden off the shoulders. And what the enhanced system did was to take that responsibility for them. But I thank head teachers for it. You know, I'm sorry they've had such a rough start to the term, but I do thank them for taking on this responsibility for checking them. I just want to assure them it's not me saying nothing to do with me, Gov. Whatever decision they take, I will back them to the hilt in that.
Estelle Morris, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. The US and Britain say no decision has yet been taken on military action against Iraq. But President Bush's comments and the news that Tony Blair is flying to the United States at the weekend suggest a new urgency in the discussions. With the political campaign growing, a military campaign now seems certain within the next 6 months. At the first stage, Britain would probably contribute towards a massive air campaign of up to 2 months. It's thought that stage 2 might involve the use of special forces and limited numbers of ground troops. A big invasion force would take at least 60 days to assemble and seems unlikely. Britain would probably offer special forces and technical support, including tanks and aircraft. The military objective would be to capture or neutralize Saddam Hussein. Well, we're joined now here by the defence analyst Paul Beaver to talk about all this. Paul, are we now heading for war?
I think we are, Jeremy. I think we're about 95% of the way down the track to war. I think
95% of the way down. When are you suggesting it might start?
Well, it's in the next 6 months, but I think once the process starts, it's almost unstoppable. There are political things to happen first, of course. I think that Britain and America will go for a resolution in the United Nations about arms inspectors going back in unfettered, anywhere they want to go, any time of the day, in any place in Iraq. And I think that is a key diplomatic move. But if that doesn't work, then I think the Americans will certainly want to go down the line to create the military force to actually go into Iraq.
Now, there's a huge amount of impatience about this in America, especially. The thing about those arms inspectors is that last time around they were there from 1991 until 1998, 7 years, and they did a big job there. If they went in again, assuming for a moment that the Iraqis say, OK, you can come in, do the Americans then have to wait 6 or 7 years? Or do they want results very quickly?
There's a timescale on it. They'll put a timescale. Probably in a matter of months they'll want to. There are places now through defectors, through intelligence gathering both on the ground and in space. The places they want to go to. What they're concerned about is the fact that a large amount of the weapons work that's being carried out in the laboratories are now mobile. They're in containers. They can be driven around. They can be flown around the country. And this is the real concern. And they didn't finish their job before. If you remember, there were key places they wanted to go to, and they kept being obstructed.
Now, Iraq is going to be no kind of military opponent to the United States, clearly. It wasn't last time, it won't be this time. The problem starts afterwards.
Absolutely.
How do they deal with that?
You've got a nation build, and the Americans are not very good.
They don't like doing that. They didn't like doing it in Afghanistan. In fact, they were contemptuous about doing that.
But the thing about Afghanistan, as opposed to Iraq, is at least there was a sort of potential government in waiting there. At least they knew who the political figures were that they could bring in. The problem with Iraq is there are so many disparate groups, it's going to be almost impossible to get them together.
The potential leaders are either dead or discredited.
Well, exactly. And that is a real concern. That must be, I would have thought, Prime Minister Tony Blair's major concern, because the United Kingdom, from my reading of it, is always concerned about what happens afterwards. It's that nation building, it's that end game that's important. The other thing is that traditionally, of course, Iraq and the United Kingdom have had, before Saddam Hussein's days, had a close relationship. There is a warm feeling towards the Iraqi people, and the last thing I think the British people want to see is the Iraqi people put through any more hassle. They've had enough of 20 years of Saddam Hussein.
Paul Beaver, thank you.
Pleasure.
Ian Duncan-Smith will be joining us in about 20 minutes' time to talk about that very subject. Right now, though, Carol Kirkwood with the weather.
It's quite a pleasant start to the day for some of us as well, Sophie, today. Not too cold either. We've had some rain around. In fact, if we look at our Belfast camera, you'll see what I mean. It's quite cloudy here. The first band of rain's already gone through, but there is another one hot on its heels. So if you're heading out in Belfast this morning, make sure you take your umbrella with you. In Leeds, well, about 20 minutes ago, this was a lovely scene, some blue skies, but again, here too, the cloud has developed somewhat. Now, back in London, it's a pleasant start to the day. Again, we've got some cloud around, but really what's affecting southern parts of England and also East Anglia this morning is patchy fog. Visibility is as low as 100 metres in some places, so if you're travelling, bear that in mind. It should disperse quite nicely as we go through the next few hours. So then this morning, when we lose that, for many of us again, it's going to be very pleasant, some sunshine, some bright spells, hazy sunshine at that. But the rain that we already have through parts of Western Scotland edging out of Northern Ireland at the moment is going to continue to slip steadily southeastwards. Now, there's still likely to be some heavy bursts mixed in and amongst it. So by lunchtime, it could be heavy, for example, round about the Highlands of Scotland. And through the day, that's going to continue to trundle southeastwards, eventually arriving, say, in the northeast of England and down towards Wales by evening. Now behind it, it should brighten up, but there'll still be some showers around, and the winds are going to strengthen in the northwest, even to gale force in exposed parts of the northwest. Ahead of it too, largely dry, largely bright, but the risk of a shower through East Anglia and Kent. But here we're likely to have the highest temperatures today, probably about 23 degrees Celsius, our top temperature in London, that's 73 Fahrenheit. That's it from me. Back to you two.
Carol, thank you very much. We've got loads of emails and text messages for Jeremy today because it is his last day, and I like this one particularly. Andy in Darlington says, goodbye, Mr. Bowen. Breakfast will not be the same. It will be like full English without bacon. Good luck.
Very nice. Thank you very much. Yeah, I do like bacon, as a matter of fact. Here's the Mail. Time to look at the papers. Patients lose GP surgery. What's happening in a town in Derby is that asylum seekers are getting their own dedicated medical facility there. And Wendy Richard, also Jeff Boycott, suffering from cancer.
The Daily Mirror this morning, Walkies is their headline. Bush summons Poodle Blair to US as a cheerleader for his war in Iraq, and Iraq is also the subject of the front page of the Daily Express. Iraq, tanks on the move. Blair flies out to the United States for urgent war talks, they say.
It's the Telegraph, Bush and war there. They found a bishop who says the attack would be justified. Other bishops say that an attack wouldn't be justified. And at the bottom there's a story about the Prue cutting payouts to some of its pensioners.
The Independent, with resolve stiffened, Blair will meet Bush for Council of War, they say. And at the bottom of the story we were talking about with Estelle Morris a moment ago, Morris allows unvetted teachers into schools.
Here's the Times. Their coverage of Iraq also features Britain's two most senior churchmen talking about this wicked war, is what they're calling it. They've written an article in the newspaper.
It's 20 minutes past 7. Now, surgeons operating on cancer patients are using a new computer system to help them perform better operations. 3D images of CT scans come up on a laptop while they work, allowing the operating theatre teams to view tumours from all angles.
The technology is expected to improve safety and accuracy. Kevin Bouquet joins us from Manchester Royal Infirmary, where it's being pioneered.
Good morning.
Morning, yes. Now, this is a technique that could revolutionise the way that operations are performed. Now, normally, when surgeons perform operations, they work from this sort of thing. These are two-dimensional images. They are effectively X-rays. But in future, they're going to be working from something like that. Rory McCloy, what are we looking at?
This is a three-dimensional reconstruction of an X-ray of a patient's abdomen. This is the dark area over here is the stomach, the bright area over here is the liver, and we're looking round here where there's a cancer. And by using an SGI supercomputer, we're able, live in the operating theatre, to be able to move the images around so that I can cut through and slice these images and look where the cancer is in relationship to vital structures like this big vein.
And what difference is that going to make to you when you're performing operations?
Well, the big change for me is that this is in the operating theatre. It's on the wall of my operating theatre. So whilst I'm operating with this patient's cancer in my hands on the operating table, I can use this computer mouse to actually move the images around and cut through them in different ways and work out which is the most accurate way to perform my surgery.
And where are the images actually coming from?
The images are coming from half a mile up the road at Manchester University. The SGI computer is transmitting them down a fast broadband data link, and by transmitting it down to the operating theatre here, I can view them live from just using my laptop.
And will this only be available at big hospitals like the Manchester Royal Infirmary?
No, we're only half a mile away from the SGI computer. I could actually be 200 miles away or 2,000 miles away. So this is the sort of technique which could be available to other hospitals throughout the United Kingdom.
And presumably more than one surgeon can be following the course of an operation as it's going on.
Yes, you could have an expert surgeon in a major centre interpreting the images for a surgeon in a peripheral hospital.
OK, Rory McCloy, thanks very much indeed. The experiments that they've carried out so far at the Manchester Royal Infirmary have gone well. They're planning more to come. Back to the studio.
Kevin, thank you very much. Sorry about the sound there. I think his mic fell off. That was the clonk.
23 past 7. Today we start a series of special reports looking at America 1 year on from September the 11th. The World Trade Center and the Pentagon were at the heart of the attacks last year, but we're starting with the story of Flight 93.
That was the plane on which passengers and crew are thought to have attacked the hijackers. Well, Breakfast's Graham Satchell has been to the quiet town of Shanksville in Pennsylvania, where Flight 93 came down.
Flight 93 was headed for Washington, probably the White House. It never got there. With the now infamous words, "Let's roll," the passengers fought back. They forced the plane to crash here, Shanksville, Pennsylvania. This is small-town America. The people of Shanksville describe it themselves as a place that time forgot in the middle of nowhere. Dutch, the oldest man in town, whiles away the hours on his porch, talking to anyone who happens to pass by. The sign says it's a friendly little town, but there's also an edginess here. It's overtly patriotic. The American flag is everywhere. It's a place forever in the shadow of tragedy.
It's something that you think about every day. Even a year later, you don't get out of bed without thinking about Flight 93.
Terry Schaefer was the first to get the call. It was 10:06 on September the 11th.
I arrived to find that there was literally nothing that we could do, that there wasn't a piece bigger than the hood of a car left of the plane. Everything else had just exploded and then broken up into very fine bits. It's something that we'll long remember here, the fellows in the fire station that responded that day.
A traffic jam in rural Pennsylvania, less than a mile from Shanksville. They come to see what remains of Flight 93. Not much is the answer, just another flag. And this is the temporary memorial to Flight 93. Really, it's little more than a car park, but every day hundreds of ordinary Americans come from all over the country to leave their thoughts and mementos and to read what other people have written.
I thought they were really brave and courageous, and they showed the American spirit of love for country and family.
I think it changed America. We're not as naive, not as innocent as we used to be, and that's unfortunate for these kids because the America I grew up in is not what it is today.
Some things, of course, haven't changed. Most Americans still believe in God, still go to church.
And thank you, God, again for Bob and for the way...
But in many ways, the old certainties have been shattered. Here in Shanksville, they worry about national security, about flying. They look over their shoulder and wonder if September the 11th will happen again.
Americans have always felt, like we've got it all. We know what we're doing. Who can touch us? Well, we found out the hard way.
Jerry and Bea Guadagno thought nothing could touch their family, certainly not terrorism. In a quiet cemetery in Trenton, New Jersey, they tend the grave of their only son. Richard Guadagno had flown to New Jersey for his grandmother's 100th birthday. It was September the 10th. The next day, he flew home on Flight 93.
All I want to see him come in that door and hear that call, "Hi, Mom," which I will never hear again. That, to me, has been taken away. There's a hole in our hearts that will never be replaced.
That's the story of Flight 93. On tomorrow's programme, Graham will be looking at how children who lost a parent in the September the 11th attacks have coped in the last year.
Right now, Max Foster can bring us the latest business news. He's here with the Money Minute. Hello.
Morning to you both. Europe's third largest insurance company, Zurich Financial, is cutting 4,500 jobs. We've learnt this morning. It's announced a half-year loss of £1.3 billion. As many as 1,500 of those jobs could go in the UK. In the UK, the company owns Allied Dunbar and Eagle Star. Zurich has basically been damaged by some very large claims and the falling stock markets. Now, the immense success of this pre-mixed cocktail, Smirnoff Ice, has helped drive profits in the world's #1 spirit maker, Diageo. That's a UK-based company. Profits were up only slightly, up 3% on the year. The other big seller was Captain Morgan Rum, interestingly. But Diageo warns it'll be challenging to meet its financial targets in the current year. So looking ahead, things aren't as bright as they have been for the company. Let's have a look at the markets then. The FTSE yesterday was down slightly. All day it was fluttering around this 4,000 point mark. It eventually finished up, so that's quite positive. The Dow Jones was up after its immense falls the day before. Also, the Nasdaq was up 2%, so that's also quite positive. But September is a quiet month for the stock market, so looking ahead, it may not be that busy. We've also got the subdued feeling expected from September the 11th. The Nikkei was also up from its 19-year lows yesterday, and these are the currencies much more steady than yesterday.
Max, thanks very much. And thanks as well to everybody who sent me, and Sophie too, very nice messages in the last, well, today and the last couple of days. There have been, lots, and I'm very... Touched is a very good word. I'm very touched by them. It's very, I mean, I'm really...
You keep us going in the morning, all these messages.
Yeah.
It's 29 minutes past 7. Coming up, Downing Street says it is not a council of war, but as Tony Blair prepares to fly out to Camp David for talks with President Bush, it's clear that only one subject on the table. We'll be asking the leader of the opposition, Ian Duncan-Smith, what he thinks of the latest developments.
That's in a few minutes from now. First, though, let's join our news teams across the UK.
Good morning, I'm Michael Colley. Now the main news, travel and weather here in the Midlands. Campaigners opposing plans to expand Birmingham International Airport have hailed a meeting held last night as a success. Hundreds of people from the Solihull area gathered in Catherine de Barnes. An action group has been set up to represent the views of residents. A number of people expressed fears about vast areas of land disappearing and increased noise pollution. A stretch of the M6 motorway reopened in the early hours of this morning following a crash which killed 4 people yesterday. Last night the motorway remained partly closed near Keele between junctions 12 and 13. A lorry crashed through the central reservation just before midday into the path of vehicles travelling in the opposite direction. The international human rights group Amnesty is calling for the immediate release of a group of suspected British terrorists. They're being held at Guantanamo Bay in Cuba. The group contains 3 men from Tipton in the Black Country. The charity claims they're being denied the right to lawyers. Finally, Midlands fire brigades are today calling for legislation over the installation of liquefied petroleum gas, or LPG, conversions to fuel cars. To find out more about this and the explosive consequences of ill-fitted systems, tune into Midlands Today, BBC One, 6:30 this evening. But now back to Sophie and Jeremy.
And for the last time, Jeremy, you can now say it's 7:31.
It's 7:31. I can say it, but not in the studio in the future.
You could
I'll
just sit at home and practice,
7:32
that's true.
and
All right, you
7:33.
could do it in unison with us when we do it next week. You could sort of sit there at home saying,
Well, I'll be
saying the lines.
abroad, I'm afraid.
I'm afraid.
I'll have to watch it on the internet or something. 7:31, you're watching Breakfast from BBC News. Shortly we're going to be speaking to the Tory leader, Ian Duncan-Smith.
We're going to be talking about a lot of other things as well, but right now let's find out what is going on in the world with Kate Sanderson. Good morning.
Thank you, good morning. Schools in England and Wales will be trying to contact staff today to tell them to come into work, even though security checks on their background aren't complete. More than 7,000 checks still have to be carried out by the Criminal Records Bureau. But last night, the Education Secretary, Estelle Morris, changed her mind about enforcing the vetting policy because of the disruption it's causing. Well, earlier on Breakfast, the Education Secretary, Estelle Morris, told us why she decided to reverse her decision.
That it's not settled down well, it's been behind schedule right since spring, and we've been keeping a week-by-week check on it. But I suppose you want the best of all worlds. I wanted the enhanced system. It was meant to be in place by this September, and there's nobody telling me the enhanced system isn't a good thing to have.
President Bush is considering seeking a UN Security Council resolution that will set a deadline for weapons inspections to begin again in Iraq. He'll try to persuade the Security Council to come up with a new resolution which would allow for military strikes if weapons inspections aren't resumed. Hunting doesn't keep fox numbers down, according to new research by the RSPCA. The 12-month study carried out during the foot-and-mouth crisis, when fox hunting was banned in the countryside, reveals that the UK fox population stayed constant. The pro-hunting lobby has dismissed the findings. Inner city schools must improve pupil discipline if standards are going to rise. That's according to a policy document being launched this morning by the Conservatives. Among the proposals is a good behaviour contract that parents would have to sign before their children were allowed to join a school. Head teachers would also be given greater powers to expel disruptive pupils with the abolition of appeal panels. It's not just cigarettes and alcohol that cost less when you buy them across the channel. Researchers from Which magazine found a whole range of electrical and household goods are cheaper on the continent. They saved £339 shopping abroad for a shaver, a coffee maker, digital camera, adult's bike and designer glasses. Children starting secondary school are 3 times more likely to be killed or injured on their way to school than primary pupils. The AA says older students usually have to walk further and cross unfamiliar roads on their journey to a new school. They recommend that children be accompanied, even if they're reluctant, at least for the first few weeks of term, until they're familiar with new routes. The prison service is accused this morning of not doing enough to prevent inmates from re-offending after they're released. A report by the Public Accounts Committee says too little is being spent on inmates' education while they're serving their sentences. 6 out of 10 prisoners go on to commit a further crime within 2 years of their release. The first Ealing comedy for 50 years premiered in London last night. Leicester Square was teeming with people hoping to catch a glimpse of the stars of The Importance of Being Earnest. Dame Judi Dench, who plays Lady Bracknell, was there. Rupert Everett made it along as well. But anyone hoping to see Colin Firth in the flesh was disappointed, as he was filming in France. That's all the news for now. Back to Jeremy and Sophie.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Kate. Let's go to the sport. Here's Rob.
Good radio listening today, of course. Test match special. Yeah. BBC Radio 4 long way for the fourth test between England and India. By now, the domestic international cricket season is usually over, but instead we have the prospect of a really exciting finale to the current Empire Test series between England and India at the Oval. The fourth and decisive match starts today, with the series balanced at 1-1 after India's big win in the third test at Headingley.
India have become so at home in England, they've even found a use for London's many traffic cones. Sourav Ganguly is approaching something that's eluded so many of his predecessors, winning a series outside Asia. After 16 years of trying, it's now a familiar burden.
I think there's pressure on both the sides. Nasser will be trying to win at home because he's going for a tough tour after this to Australia, where there's a lot of focus on England. And obviously we'll also be trying to win because it will be a major win for us. So I think there's pressure on both the sides.
There's no escaping the next challenge for England. For this winter's ultimate series in Australia, the team need to generate momentum by beating India here.
Yeah, obviously if you turn up in Australia having just won a series, you'll be full of confidence. 4 years ago, we'd just beaten South Africa. We were full of confidence. Unfortunately, we came here and played Sri Lanka on a turning wicket and came unstuck. So we didn't leave for Australia last time in the best of spirits. If you can do what we say, then it'd be brilliant and bring the Ashes back home. But I just haven't said what year.
Well, there's serious concern Michael Vaughan's knee might not be up to this trip to Australia. Marcus Trescothick's thumb is still heavily protected. Hussain's England will end their longest summer battered and bruised, but with victory still in reach. Joe Wilson, BBC News at the Oval.
On to tennis now. Leighton Hewitt, the defending champion, has beaten Younes El Anoui of Morocco in 4 sets in the US Open quarter-finals and will meet Andre Agassi for a place in the final at Flushing Meadows. Agassi was also taken to 4 sets by Max Mirny of Belarus. The 6th seed is bidding for his 3rd win at Flushing Meadows, but clearly faces a tough task against Hewitt, who's on a 23-match winning streak against American players. There's the continuing prospect of yet another Williams sisters final after Venus joins Serena in the last 4 with a straight sets win over Monica Seles. Venus now meets Amelie Mauresmo after she beat Jennifer Capriati. The FA has charged Manchester United's Roy Keane with bringing the game into disrepute on 2 counts, both charges relating to a tackle on Manchester City's Alf-Inge Haaland, described in Keane's recent autobiography. He has 14 days to respond. An encouraging result, meanwhile, from Scotland's under-21 side ahead of their opening 2004 European qualifying match against the Faroe Islands on Saturday. The youngsters beat Israel 2-1. They got off to the perfect possible start. Celtic's Sean Maloney giving them the lead after just 4 minutes. Israel equalised before substitute John Kennedy scored Scotland's winner, also from a corner. A memorable night indeed for Kennedy. He was making his under-21 debut. Well, news that the number of drugs positives in British sport has dropped over the last year, according to figures released overnight by UK Sport, despite there being more tests. However, 2 sports, rugby league and powerlifting, still have problems. Ollie Foster reports.
UK Sport analysed over 6,000 samples during their latest review period, and only 101 warranted further investigation. That's a decrease in the percentage of positive findings on last year. Good news. With over 40 sports tested, to have only 1.7% of samples suspect is encouraging. But not so for rugby league. 18 of almost 300 tests, 6.1%, suggests they have a problem.
They've been very conscious of raising the awareness of the players about the use of supplements or about checking the medications that they actually are likely to take. And so that's something that they are to be congratulated on. But at the end of the day, changing the hearts and minds of players who perhaps are committed to using these substances is a tough challenge.
Warrington sacked one of their players last year for steroid abuse. Cheating won't be tolerated, but there is a grey area when food supplements are being linked with some positive tests.
Two people might take the same supplement, and one person might, pass the test and the other might fail. So, I think a lot of research and investigation has to be done into this before we start condemning rugby league as a sport as a whole, or start condemning individual players. But there is a problem, let's nip it in the bud.
The testing goes on for UK sport, and later this month they'll be releasing a separate report into the spate of nandrolone cases in all sports. Ollie Foster, BBC News.
That's it for the time being. We really will be speaking to Angus Fraser live from the Oval at 8:30.
Rob, thank you.
So you hope. Thanks, Rob.
Thank you very much. Ian Duncan-Smith called on Tony Blair to take action against Saddam Hussein at the weekend. The Iraqi threat, he said, was one that Britain would ignore at its peril. The Prime Minister has promised to present the public with a dossier of evidence supporting his claim that action is necessary. He's due to fly out to Camp David this weekend for talks with George Bush. Ian Duncan-Smith, who's the leader of the Conservatives, of course, joins us now. Welcome to the programme. Thanks for coming in. What do you want as far as Iraq's concerned? Is it regime change?
Well, I think what essentially I was saying was that we needed clarity about where we intended to take the whole issue. I worried that over the summer the case against Saddam Hussein was not being made, that the government had evidence and an understanding that Saddam Hussein was developing weapons of mass destruction, biological weapons as well as nuclear weapons, and also the missiles to carry them, and the next generation of missiles which he's been working on with North Korea have the capacity to strike most of Europe, including London. So it's a direct threat to the United Kingdom. It's not just a threat to the United States.
That's a long way down the line.
No, it's not that long.
Iraqi intercontinental ballistic missiles?
No, it's not. I mean, what is most fascinating about this is the way in which, during the Gulf War, the Allies were very surprised to the degree in which he had developed missiles. He had the range and the quality of missiles that they hadn't expected. And the other thing was the amount of biological capability he had to produce biological weapons and also nuclear capability. Richard Butler, the ex-head of UNSCOM, and this is very important, after he was kicked out a couple of years ago, he said that there is no question that Iraq has been developing, in contravention of the UN resolutions, further biological weapons, and was desperately seeking the materials to make nuclear weapons. So he is carrying on all of those programs.
Scott Ritter, who is a senior inspector under UNSCOM, says that there's no need for this war because anything that was there was destroyed, and there are much better ways of keeping Saddam Hussein in check than going to war with everything that entails.
Look, I think the lesson of history that teaches us is that if you stand back and say that a threat like this is not a threat, then later on it becomes almost impossible to deal with. And it is others who've said quite rightly that what do you do when Saddam Hussein possesses a device that is capable either of striking London or being placed in London? What do you say to the British people at that point? I'm sorry, we wouldn't make the right decision 3 or 4 years ago, so now we have to confront what is a very, very major threat.
Okay, assuming that a good case can be made against Saddam Hussein, and that's a pretty good bet, what do you want to happen after the troops go in, they take Baghdad, the Americans can do that easily, it's not going to be a problem for them. What happens then? Nation building, surely, and a big commitment, perhaps of British troops, to Iraq. Are you happy with that idea?
Well, I'm never opposed to the idea that if we want to see a threat taken out and changed, you have to take what comes next. And I think the government will have to entertain the whole concept of what comes after Saddam Hussein, if that essentially is what happens. I don't think that's a particular issue. There is, in fact, anywhere at the moment, a very serious opposition group headed by Mr. Chalabi, who's been spending his time, I know, talking to Washington.
Not everybody says it's very serious.
But, well, a lot of people will dismiss almost anything. I mean, those who want to discredit opposition groups in Iraq have to ask themselves the question, do they really want to support Saddam Hussein? The real problem...
Isn't that a key question? Who replaces Saddam Hussein?
Absolutely, but you can't absolutely plan what happens after that. What you do is you work to make sure that if Saddam Hussein is removed, then what happens next is that you have a balanced regime that actually ultimately works in the interests of the Iraqi people and in the interests of those in the region and doesn't become a threat like Mr. Saddam Hussein is at the moment.
Can we move on to the field of domestic politics? You've got a problem, haven't you? The Tories still, a year into your tenure as leader, are not seen as a credible party of government.
Well, I don't make any bones about it. The purpose of my leadership is to take the Conservative Party forward, construct that alternative and do it logically and in a way that the public actually see makes us an alternative to the present government. And we're not going to do that overnight.
Sounds like you're practically writing off the next election already.
No, not at all. I believe that we will win the next election, but we'll only win the next election if I'm able to demonstrate that we understand what the problem is, that we realise that the public's fears and concerns over public services are ones that we have to tackle as our priorities, that we can't spend time talking about issues that are not their priorities, and that we can bring forward, as I begin to do in this autumn, ideas about policy that will take us down the road that says, look, the government's failed. As education is a very good example because they've centralised, they're controlling schools and making a mess of it. We want to give schools greater power and give head teachers the freedom to do what they know they want to do, which is teach children.
Policy is a key issue, clearly, if you're going to have any chance in the next election, in due course. And one of the criticisms against you is that the way you've kept your fractious party quiet is by avoiding talking about the difficult stuff, like the euro.
Oh, no, it's not nonsense. What I want to do with my party is not to spend time banging on about a couple of issues that the public says are important but aren't their priorities. The public priorities that we know are they want to know why their schools are failing and what we're going to do to sort them out. The same with hospitals, the same with the fact that we have rising violent crime on the streets and their children threatened and elderly people. And we today published, as part of a critique of government failure, a pamphlet on education which shows that if you live in the inner cities, your educational prospects for your children have got worse in the last 5 years, not better. And the next stage is to show that the real problem is the fact that the government has made so much of that worse by micromanaging schools and taking the power to discipline children away from head teachers and from teachers.
Perhaps you can get some good hits on education and public services areas which the government accept there are problems in. But what about Europe? That was the thing that many people thought really torpedoed you last time round, and you're going to have to address that problem and get some kind of position on it.
No, we've already addressed
the problem that sorts out some of the big problems, the fault lines.
With respect, with the one hand, you say to me that we don't talk about it. I made it absolutely clear in my leadership election. I stood on a platform which has been accepted by the party. We have a policy. The policy is, as and when that referendum comes, we will fight to keep the pound, which is what the majority of the public want. They do not want to take the euro. That is clear now, and we're now moving on. We've done that. That's clear. It's the government that's got the problem, because one moment Mr. Blair says he's in favour of scrapping the pound, the next moment he says he might not have the referendum. Why doesn't he get on with it and stop wasting time talking about it? He should be getting on with sorting out schools and hospitals, or else get on with this referendum, but not, as he keeps doing, trailing his coat to the British people, saying, perhaps I can bully you into believing the same as me. That's his key.
You're launching some education ideas today. Yeah. Wouldn't it have been better if you got round to this some months ago before the government, not just on education, but on other issues like health, about pumping a lot of money into the public services, got going? You've lost the political high ground again, haven't you?
No, not at all. Since September, when I got selected as leader, we have campaigned strongly on education, health and law and order. In fact, if you look back in the summer, the government has had to do another messy U-turn over health policy. About a year ago, they said that all hospitals and the whole of the health service would be a monopoly provider made by the government. In other words, the government would run everything. There'd be no change. In the summer now, they're panicking and saying, well, maybe we should let some hospitals be free to run themselves. We were saying that to them over a year ago, and we have said all along that simply spending more money will not improve the services. I'll give you one good example.
Okay, we're running out of time.
In Wales and Northern Ireland, they spend as much money on health per head of the population as they do in France. Yet the quality of the service in Wales and Northern Ireland, health service, is appalling compared to that in France. So it's not just money, it's the way you run the service, and that's what the government's problem is.
Ian Duncan-Smith, thanks for joining us here this morning.
Thank you.
Very nearly 10 minutes to 8. Let's have a look at the latest business now with Max.
Yeah, good morning. The Bank of England's meeting today. We should know by lunchtime what its decision is on interest rates. The feeling here is that interest rates will be kept on hold at 4%, and that's a 38-year low. But calls for a rate cut are growing. Manufacturers and retailers are putting pressure on the rate setters. CBI figures yesterday showed the worst retail sales data for 2 years, and there are signs of a cooling in the housing market. Now, the immense success of a certain drink called Smirnoff Ice has helped push up profits at the world's largest spirits maker, Diageo. Profits were up 3%, not an enormous figure, but to put into context, they're actually at £2 billion, shows how large the company is. But Diageo warns it'll be challenging to meet its financial targets in the current year. Paul Walsh is chief executive of Diageo. He's joining us this morning. Mr. Walsh, why challenging ahead?
Well, I just think the global economy is a challenging one at present. Having said that, we are maintaining our growth targets, that is 8 to 10% on the top line and double-digit on the bottom line. What I'm just saying is that if anybody is well positioned to achieve those targets, Diageo is, but they are challenging times. Also, if I can just mention, our premium drinks business actually improved its profits in the fiscal year we're reporting by 13%.
And are you sticking with premium drinks? Because you've sold Burger King, apparently going to sell Oddbins, is that right? So you're just going to be focusing on drinks?
Oddbins came with the Seagram acquisition, and we have already sold it. We are definitely going to focus on premium drinks. We stated that as our strategic intention 18 months ago, and we've executed against that.
I mentioned Smirnoff Ice, that's doing quite well, but a very similar drink which you tried to launch was Captain Morgan Gold. That didn't go particularly well. So why, it's a pretty difficult market to be in, isn't it?
Well, I think all markets, all consumer markets, are challenging. We had great success with Smirnoff Ice. We're building on that success with the new launch of Black Ice, which is a little less sweet and I think will do extremely well. In the case of Captain Morgan Gold, that product has not reached our expectations. That's part of life when you want to be an innovative company. You have great successes and you have a few that don't quite meet expectations. We're not daunted by that.
OK. Mr. Walsh, thank you for joining us this morning. Good luck with the year ahead then. And it only is left for me then to hand back to Jeremy for the last time.
Oh, the last time.
Well, these last moments, Max, thank you.
The last moments. You'll never have the business news again. And Carol Kirkwood, you only get to talk to her 3 more times. We have so many messages.
I'm not going to die. I'm still working for the BBC, you know.
I know, but you won't be sitting here on the yellow sofa in the morning.
No.
This is the point. I know you're still working for us. Now, we have had loads and loads and loads of messages this morning, and so it's pretty difficult to select any of them because they are all very kind and very complimentary to Mr. Bowen here. Claire in Bristol says, good luck with the book, which is what you're off to do, isn't it?
Bye, everybody.
We will miss your comments and humour, as I am sure Sophie will.
Well,
of course.
That's the way.
Of course I will. And Amy in Hertfordshire says, no, I can't believe Jeremy's leaving. Waking up is not going to be the same without him. And Gillian says, the laughter and the almost tears caused by you, Mr. Bowen, have made mornings wonderful. Sorry to see you go. Glad to hear you'll be doing some reporting again. Just be careful, she says.
I'm going to be very careful. Thank you to everybody, to Gillian who did that last one, and to everybody who sent in these wonderful messages over the last few days. It's really touching to see that people are taking the trouble to send it. I'm amazed.
Overwhelmed.
I'm gobsmacked.
Gobsmacked?
I'm amazed that people can be bothered to write about it. It's incredible. Thank you all very much.
Yes, you're keeping us going. We do read them all, despite what most people think. We actually do. I'm sitting here looking at them coming in right now. We read them all on our computer screens. Anyway, Carol Kirkwood is right outside Television Centre, or in Television Centre, in fact, with her half-eaten breakfast. What's that?
I tell you what, Sophie, I'm not sure. I could break my teeth in it, though. Look at that. It's as hard as nails. It really is. But it's a nice old start to the day, I must say. It's not particularly cold here in London, and it's fairly dry and nice and bright as well. But in Birmingham at the moment, it is quite a misty old scene. Now, back here in London, as I mentioned, it's mild. We do have a problem with mist and fog generally this morning. And in actual fact, a wee while ago, we looked at our Tunbridge Wells cameras and we could hardly see it, but it has improved in this part of the world. So this morning, we've also got some rain on the radar picture, extending through parts of Western Scotland into Fort William, for example, making good progress in through the Highlands generally. And it's extending also into the Irish Sea. Some heavy bursts, as denoted here by the brighter colours. Now, this morning, that's going to continue. The patchy fog will eventually die away. It's affecting largely southern England and also East Anglia too, but when it does go away, it will brighten up and we'll see some hazy sunshine coming through. But that band of cloud and rain through the course of this morning into the lunchtime period and then in through the afternoon will continue to progress southwards and eastwards. by the end of the afternoon, probably resting round about the northeast of England and down into the southwest of England as well. And it will be a fragmenting band. It's not going to be as heavy by then. Behind it, it will brighten up. We'll still catch 1 or 2 showers, and the winds are going to strengthen, even gale force winds in the northwest exposed areas of Scotland, and ahead of it in the south and east, while it will be dry with increasing amounts of cloud and the risk of a shower. Top temperature today, a very pleasant 23. That's it from me. Back to you two.
Carol, thank you.
Yeah, coming up.
I'm giving you all the work today. I'm just sitting back. In fact, I might just sit back and let you do the rest of it. It's your last day. You do the work. Go on.
Celebrity chef Rick Stein. He's going to be coming in to tell us about why he's been journeying the length and breadth of Britain to find culinary perfection. Now let's join our news teams across the UK.
Good morning, I'm Michael Colley. Campaigners opposing plans to expand Birmingham International Airport have hailed a meeting held last night as a success. Hundreds of people from the Solihull area turned out at Catherine de Barnes to express their concerns. As a result, an action group called Solihull Opposing Additional Runways has been formed. Alison Marsh reports.
It's the first opportunity the people of Solihull have had to come together to discuss plans for the expansion of Birmingham Airport. And they came in their hundreds to the village hall in Catherine de Barnes last night. One of the options is to build a huge new runway to accommodate increasing passenger numbers. Good news for the airlines, but not so good for residents.
People don't realise, I think, maybe what we're looking at in Solihull by 2030. We're looking at something approaching a Heathrow.
Down the road in Warwickshire, action groups have already been formed. They vow to fight plans to build a massive new airport near Rugby. Now it's the turn of people in Solihull. Organisers are forming an action group there to make sure their towns and villages won't be lost to the airport's expansion.
A stretch of the M6 motorway reopened in the early hours of this morning following a crash which killed 4 people yesterday. A lorry crashed through the central reservation near Keele just before midday, ploughing into the path of vehicles travelling in the opposite direction. A funeral service takes place today for one of the police officers who died while trying to stop a van that had been chased from Birmingham to Leicestershire. PC Andrew Munn and his colleague PC Brian Moore were killed as the white van ploughed into their patrol car near Ashby de la Zouche. A man from Acox Green in Birmingham is charged with murder. A woman jailed for failing to take a fence down inside her neighbour's land will be taking her case to the Court of Appeal in London today. 26-year-old Samantha Richards from Shropshire was imprisoned after a 4-year dispute. Sharina Saga has more.
Tranquility Cottage in Hopesay in Shropshire. It looks quiet, but a row over the garden fence landed Samantha Richards behind bars. Miss Richards and her mother, who are featured in a BBC documentary, put up a fence alongside their home. Their neighbour, Tony Benson, claimed it was a metre inside his boundary. His claim was upheld in court. But Samantha Richards refused to take down the fence, despite numerous court orders. As a result, she was jailed for 3 months at the beginning of August this year. Mr Benson spent £30,000 in legal costs. The dispute for him may be over, but the battle continues for the Richards. Samantha Richards will appear at the Court of Appeal in London later today to try and get her sentence reduced.
On to travel news now, and we've news of an overturned car and caravan on the M40 northbound. That's in lane 1, just before junction 15, the Warwick turnoff. OK, back to Sophie and Jeremy in a moment. Before that, here's the Midlands weather forecast and David.
Good morning to you. There's a bit of mist around first thing this morning, but not the sort of fog problems we had yesterday. And it should be essentially a dry story, but there is a weather front moving down from the northwest. That's the one that's going to move into the Midlands later on through the morning and more especially this afternoon, bringing with it some outbreaks of rain, and that rain will be with us into the evening as well. So to start the day, a bright, dry start, not a huge amount of sunshine, very hazy the sunshine if we do see it, and just the outside chance of some of the cloud floating around, thick enough to give the odd light shower, but essentially a dry story. But then come the afternoon, we'll find a bit more cloud coming through. By this evening, that'll bring some persistent rain across us. Temperature-wise, 19 or 20 I think will be our best figure. 20 in Gloucester, 20 in Coventry, around 18 or 19 degrees up towards Stoke and Shrewsbury. The outlook for the next few days, well, tomorrow sunshine and showers. Into the weekend those showers continue, and for all of us really it's going to feel somewhat cooler and fresher. Bye for now.
Thanks, David. Finally, Midlands fire brigades are today calling for legislation over liquefied petroleum gas, or LPG, conversions on cars. Tonight on Midlands Today, we'll be setting light to one such conversion. So find out more about the explosive consequences of badly fitted LPG systems. Midlands Today, BBC One, 6:30.
Military are committing extrajudicial killings.
Now, torture continues to be a problem in Mexico.
The truth about British politics is that it's the centre-left that's got the new ideas.
Truth is that you're actually having difficulty putting blue water between the two parties.
No, I don't think that's a difficulty at all.
I think that the moment America will take care of Iraq's regime, that will be much more freedom in the world.
You're going to get sacked again? You're going to get sacked
When people
from your
get
committee?
bored, I think they just sack me on principle.
Hard Talk, weeknights at 10:30 on BBC News 24.
Welcome to Breakfast from BBC News.
It's Jeremy Bowen's last hour on Breakfast. It's 1 minute to 8.